Darkcast Network. Out of the shadows comes the best of indie podcasts. Just when you thought I was gone, I'm back. This time with a little story of a mysterious murder of a young woman. Unable to be identified, it's believed that you've actually seen her before in the blockbuster hit movie Jaws. Join me as we look into the circumstances that led to her death and the lasting impact of the question: who was the Lady of the Dunes? My name is DJ, and this is the Mythical True Crime Podcast. Hello, and welcome to tonight's show. I guess we should get some housekeeping things out of the way. I have not been posting as often as I'd like. If you noticed, there was about a 3-month gap, an entire season without yours truly. I had some personal things going on, such as relocating, but now that my studio is up and running, we should be back in business, and you should be getting your taste of the macabre on a more regular basis. Speaking of which, let's get back to tonight's episode. Now, as I said, tonight's episode dealt with what was previously an unidentified murder victim. This person was found on July 26th, 1974, in Race Point Dunes in the province town of Massachusetts in the United States. Her body was exhumed in around 1980, 2000, and 2013 in efforts to identify her. Now, on October 31st, Halloween, in 2022, the FBI field office in Boston had announced that Ruth Marie Terry had been officially identified. Her husband, Guy Moldavan, was officially named as her killer August 28th, 2023. Now, a little bit of background. Ruth Marie Terry was born September 8th, 1936, in a mountainside shack in Whitwell, Tennessee, to a man named Johnny and Ava Terry, the latter whom died at the age of 23. In 1957, following a short-lived marriage, Terry left Whitwell to work at the Fisher Body automotive plant in Livonia, Michigan. In 1958, she gave birth to her son, Richard, but was unable to care for him due to financial difficulties. She allowed the superintendent of her workplace, a man named Richard Hatchett Sr., to adopt her son in return of paying off her expenses. After the adoption process was finalized, Terry left Livonia and moved to California. Terry then reached out to her son in 1972, but he was not ready to meet her due to a drug overdose, which left him in a coma for 18 days. On February 16, 1974, she married Guy Rockwell Moldavan, an antiques dealer from Reno, Nevada. 4 months before her death, the couple visited a family in Whitwell. Ruth's grandniece, Brittany, later recalled that Terry, quote, wasn't herself when she was with Moldavan, who exhibited possessive behavior during their visit. The couple then went to Chattanooga to visit Terry's half-brother, Kenneth, and his wife, Carol. They later recalled Terry and Moldavan saying that they were going to travel the U.S. to look for antiquities. Kenneth also noted that they spoke about visiting Massachusetts as they were leaving. In the late summer of 1974, Moldavan returned to Tennessee to tell Terry's family that she had gone missing from the couple's California home. According to the sister-in-law, Jan Terry, he stayed for a short time and simply told them that he didn't know where Terry was. Terry's brother James traveled to California and hired a private investigator to find her. The investigators told Terry's family that all of her belongings had been sold and that she had left the state on her own free will after becoming involved with a religious cult. In the 2 decades prior to her identification, Terry was listed as deceased in family obituaries. Carol theorized that she was in the witness protection program and she could not contact her family. Now, on July 26, 1974, a 12-year-old girl followed a barking dog to a decomposing body of an unidentified woman in the Race Point Dunes, again in Provincetown, Massachusetts. The remains were just yards away from a road that had a significant amount of insect activity. 2 sets of footprints led to the body, and tire tracks were found 50 yards or 46 meters from the scene. The woman may have died 2 weeks beforehand due to best coroner estimates. The victim was laying face down on half of the beach, covered with a blanket. There was no sign of a struggle, and police theorized that she either knew her killer or had been asleep when she died. A blue bandana and a pair of Wrangler jeans were also under her head. She had a long auburn or red hair pulled back into a ponytail by a gold-flecked elastic band. Her toenails were painted pink. Police determined that the woman was approximately 5 feet 6 inches tall, or 168 centimeters, initially believing that she was a little taller at 5 foot 8 and weighed 145 pounds, and she had an athletic build. This is the description they gave when they put out missing persons reports. She also had an expensive dental work, including crowns worth between $5,000 to $10,000, and several of her teeth had been removed. Both hands and one forearm were missing completely. Most sources say she was between the ages of 25 and 40 years old. However, she could have been as young as 20 or as old as 49. Standout feature when her body was found was that the woman was nearly decapitated, possibly from strangulation, one officer thought. One side of her head had been crushed, possibly with a military-type entrenching tool or shovel. This head injury would have caused her death. Even more disturbingly, there were signs of sexual assault, most likely post-mortem. After this quick message, we'll be right back. If this is your first time tuning in, I encourage you to subscribe to the show so you can hear all the other episodes, as well as what we have coming up in the next few weeks. Some investigators believe that the missing teeth, hands, and forearm indicate the killer wanted to hide either the victim's identity or their own. The unidentified body was buried in October 1974 after the case went cold. In 2014, one of the case investigators raised funds for a new casket because the original thin metal casket had rusted and deteriorated. Now, during the police investigation, the police pored over thousands of missing person cases and had a list of approved vehicles that were driven through the area. No matches were found at the time. At the scene, the sand and the beach blanket were not disturbed, suggesting that the body was possibly moved to the specific spot where she was found. No other evidence was found besides the jeans, the bandana, blanket, and her ponytail holder, and despite extensive searches of the surrounding dunes. The first facial reconstruction of the woman was created with clay in 1979. Her remains were exhumed in 1980 for examination. No new clues were uncovered, although the skull was not buried at the time. The body was exhumed again in March 2000 for DNA testing. And then in May 2010, a CT of her skull was carried out that generated images that were used by the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children for another reconstruction. In 1987, a Canadian woman called in with a lead and told a friend that she saw her father strangle a woman in Massachusetts around 1972. Police obviously saw that the years were not matching, but they attempted to locate the woman anyway. However, they were unsuccessful. Another woman told police the reconstruction of the victim looked like her sister, who had disappeared in the Boston area in 1974. Investigators also followed a lead involving missing criminal Rory Jean Kessinger, who would have been around 25 years old at the time of the murder. She had broken out of jail in 1973. Authorities saw a resemblance between Kessinger and the victim. However, DNA that was collected from Kessinger's mother did not match the victim. Two other missing women, Frances Ewalt of Montana and Vicki Lamberton from Massachusetts, ruled out. Now, getting into the Lady of the Dunes, not to be confused with Woman of the Dunes, which is a book published in Japan. Previously, it is not related. In August 2015, speculation arose that, again, the Lady of the Dunes, which she has been known as, may have been an extra in the 1975 film Jaws, which was shot in Martha's Vineyard, specifically the village of Menemesha, about 100 miles or 160 kilometers south of Provincetown, between May and October 1974. Joe Hill, the son of horror author Stephen King, brought this to police attention after reading Skeleton Crew, How Amateur Sleuths Are Solving America's Coldest Cases, just weeks before. While watching the film's 4th of July beach scene, Hill spotted a woman in the crowd wearing a blue bandana, Wrangler jeans, similar to those found with the body. Although the lead investigator noted the interest of this lead, others have described it as far-fetched and wild speculation. That particular film extra was not listed on any call sheet during the production, so we actually don't know who that extra was. In 2022, the skeletal remains were sent to Othram. From these, a DNA profile was generated, and that was used to identify distant relatives and eventually identifying the victim. Again, on Halloween, October 31st, 2022, the FBI field office in Boston announced that the victim had been identified as Ruth Marie Terry. No details of any potential suspects were disclosed, nor any reason why Terry was in Massachusetts at the time of her murder. The FBI stated that Terry's identity was determined using investigative genealogy, the same method used to identify other unidentified homicides and over 150 criminals, including the famous Golden State Killer. After this, on November 2nd, 2022, the MSP announced that they were seeking information on Terry's deceased husband, Guy Rockwell Moldaver. Moldaver died March 14th, 2002, so he was unable to be tried. Moldaver was an orphan who was adopted by Abram Albert Zadawarsky Moldaver and Sylvia, who went by Lily, Silverblatt, and also had a brother named Michael. In 1942, Moldaver was living in New York City, and he attended the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. He was disqualified, however, from active service in the military during World War II due to a massinoid infection. On May 11, 1946, he was working as a professor, from which he married a woman named Jolene May Loop in Bellevue, Pennsylvania. The couple lived in New York, California, and then Seattle, Washington, where Moldaver worked as a disc jockey. However, the couple's relationship didn't last, and they divorced on July 16, 1956. 2 years later, on September 30th, 1958, Moldavan married another woman, Manzanita Aline Ryan. Manzanita had a daughter from a previous marriage. Her name was Dolores, and at the age of 18, both women disappeared in Seattle, April Fool's Day, 1960, with Moldavan becoming the prime suspect. He fled Seattle, but he was arrested by the FBI and charged with unlawful flight to avoid giving testimony into their deaths. Shortly thereafter, July 29, 1960, Moldavan married another woman, Evelyn Marie Emerson, in King County, Washington. They married a second time on August 10, 1963, in Los Angeles. Moldavan subsequently faced larceny charges for swindling his third wife's family nearly out of $10,000 around the time of his second wife missing. In 1961, he was convicted of those charges and was sentenced to 15 years in state prison. A judge suspended the sentence, however, in March 1962, provided that Moldavan repay that money. True crime writer Ann Rule devoted a section of her book, Smoke, Mirrors, and Murder, to Moldavan in connection with the Ryan Marin's disappearances, with an extensive discussion of police efforts to connect Moldavan with the crime. Investigators found dismembered human body parts in Moldavan's septic tank, but were unable to prove they were either of the missing women. According to Rule, Moldavan was never charged in connection, as the King County prosecutor was reluctant to do so without a body. Rule also mentions that Moldavan married a woman named Terry in February 1974 in Reno, Nevada. Moldavan also was the prime suspect in the murder of Henry Lawrence Bard, a 28-year-old bread truck driver, and the disappearance of Barbara Jo Kelly. She was a 17-year-old waitress in 1950, June. Barbara was last seen in Humboldt County, California on June 17th, when she embarked on a date with Bard, her boyfriend. Bard's body was discovered face down on a beach near Table Bluff the following morning. He had received a gunshot to the back of the head. Except for his shoes and socks, he was nude. Barbara's personal belongings, found clearly folded and tucked underneath the rest of his, with the exception of her shoes and stockings. No trace of Barbara herself could be found. She has not been seen or heard from since, and it is thought that whoever shot Bard kidnapped her. Moldavan moved to Chular, California, a small community near Salinas, in around 1976, and according to the feature article written about him in 1985, he had retired from his job as executive vice president of a silver store on Rodeo Drive, Beverly Hills. In the profile, he was working as a radio station Kazu, K-A-Z-U, in Pacific Grove as a volunteer host for a 3-hour weekly call-in show on, quote, aging, growing, and making transitions. He also worked at a tobacco shop, and according to his obituary, he died in his home in Salinas after a lengthy illness. Born in Santa Fe, New Mexico, was a buyer with bullocks and an artist, actor, and poet. He was survived by his wife, Phyllis Moldavan, and his sister, Joan Towers. On August 28, 2023, Moldavan was officially named Terry's killer. They, however, had earlier suspects before that was happening. In 1981, investigators learned of a woman who resembled the victim and was seen with mobster Whitney Bulger around the time that the woman was presumed dead. Bulger was known for removing his victim's teeth. A link to Bulger was not been proven, and he was murdered in prison in 2018. Tony Costa, another serial killer in Truro, Massachusetts, was also initially a suspect, but later eliminated. Costa died on May 12, 1974. The victim was found in July. There was also a confession to her murder. Murderer Haddon Clark confessed to the murder, stating, quote, I could have told the police that what her name was, but after they beat the shit out of me, I wasn't going to tell them shit. This murder is still unsolved, and the police are looking for is my grandfather's garden. End quote. Authorities say Clark suffers from paranoid schizophrenia, a condition which may lead someone to confess falsely to crimes. In 2004, Clark sent a letter to his friend stating that he had killed a woman on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. He also sent 2 drawings, one of handles, naked women sprawled on her stomach, and another mapping the point where the body was found. In 2000, April, Clark led police to a spot where he claimed he'd buried 2 victims 20 years prior. He also stated that he had murdered several others in various states between the 1970s and the 1990s. Very interesting hearing that. And it's very unfortunate that the victim was not identified some 40, 50 years later. But we can now rest easy that she has been properly identified, properly buried, and her killer is named. Thank you very much for enjoying tonight's episode. If you would like to continue this series, I would be very grateful if you would continue to support me via Patreon. I have the link below in my bio. I'm also active on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. It's not called Twitter anymore. I believe it's called X, but I'm still active there and also on Threads. So if you'd like to hear a topic for a new show, a new episode, please drop me a line. Submit your idea to me, and I'll use it for an episode. I'm also considering doing a new show called Beyond the Myth. You've heard several entries already. Please give a like, please subscribe, and also share to your friends. Again, thank you very much for listening to tonight's episode. My name is DJ, and this is the Mythical True Crime Podcast, part of the Dark Cast network of indie podcast creators. Good night. Thank you very much for listening tonight and being part of the Mythical True Crime community, hosted by me, DJ. Subscribe to Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get your weekly updates. And if you like what you hear, consider subscribing. Subscribing will directly support the show and the work that I'm doing. If you'd like to be a new supporter, consider clicking the link in the description box below. For less than a cup of coffee a month, you can help me continue to make great content for listeners everywhere. No commitment, cancel anytime. This has been the Mythical True Crime Podcast. My name is DJ. Good night.